The jungle floor steamed, a living entity that had swallowed his world whole. 9 weeks. 9 weeks since the serpent's coil had claimed his wife and daughter, leaving only a chilling silence. Now, a single, cryptic carving on an ancient tree promised either a horrifying truth or a path back to them. But in this emerald labyrinth, allies were indistinguishable from predators, and every shadow could conceal a deadly secret. Can one man's desperate love overcome a conspiracy woven deep within the heart of darkness? Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next thrilling story. Let us know in the comments below what you would do in Ethan's situation. The air in the serpent's coil was a physical weight, thick with the scent of damp earth, rotting vegetation, and the unseen musk of 1,000 creatures. Ethan Vance pushed a sweat-slicked frond of a giant fern from his face, his breath sawing in his chest. Each step was an agony, his boots sinking into the sucking mud, the humidity a relentless shroud. 9 weeks. 63 days since Clara, his vibrant, life-loving wife, and Lily, his bright-eyed 10-year-old daughter, had vanished. They had embarked on what was supposed to be a gentle 3-hour river excursion from their eco-lodge near the Viridian frontier, a highlight of their anniversary trip. They never returned. The lodge had been sympathetic, initially. The local Viridian police, less so. Inspector Delgado, a man whose paunch strained against his uniform buttons, and his younger, perpetually smirking partner, Officer Ramirez, had accompanied Ethan on a few perfunctory searches. Now, on this sweltering afternoon, their patience was clearly wearing thin. "Senor Vance," Delgado grunted, wiping his brow with a stained handkerchief. He spoke in heavily accented English, his tone condescending. "We have been out here for 5 hours. Again, the jungle. She does not give up her secrets easily. Or at all." Ramirez, a few paces ahead, expertly swung his machete, severing a stubborn liana vine. "Perhaps it is time to consider other possibilities, senor. 9 weeks is a long time. The river, the animals—" He let the sentence hang, a morbid implication that twisted Ethan's gut. "No," Ethan said, his voice raw. It was the same word he'd clung to for 9 torturous weeks. "Clara is resourceful. Lily is a survivor. They found shelter, a village, something." He knew, deep down, the odds were astronomical. The serpent's coil was infamous, a vast, untamed wilderness where even experienced guides could lose their way. But hope, however irrational, was the only fuel he had left. Delgado sighed, a theatrical exhalation of exasperation. "Senor, 2 weeks ago we found their canoe, or what was left of it, smashed against the rocks downstream. The damage was significant. Likely a flash flood, or they hit a submerged snag in a strong current." Ethan's jaw tightened. He remembered the canoe, a splintered wreck that had offered no clues, no solace, only a fresh wave of despair. And the guide? Mateo Silva? What about him? "Silva?" Ramirez scoffed, turning slightly. "A local man. Knows the river, they say. But even the best can make mistakes. Or panic. We found no trace of him either." They trudged on, the silence broken only by the squelch of their boots and the incessant thrum of insects. Ethan's backpack felt like it was filled with lead, each item a painful reminder. A water filter he'd insisted Clara take, Lily's favorite sun hat, a worn photograph of the 3 of them, smiling, on a beach holiday that felt like a lifetime ago. His shoulders ached, not just from the pack, but from the crushing weight of grief and guilt. He should have been with them. A sudden, violent bout of food poisoning had confined him to the lodge that fateful morning. "Go on," he'd urged them. "Don't let me spoil your fun." The words now echoed in his mind like a cruel taunt. Another hour passed. The oppressive heat intensified. Even the usually stoic Delgado was flagging. "Senor Vance, we must turn back. It will be dark soon, and this area is known for jaguars, and other things." Ethan looked up. Through a momentary break in the dense canopy, he saw the sky, a patch of angry, bruised purple. A storm was brewing. "Just a little further," he pleaded. "Please, that ridge, up ahead. Let's just check that ridge." Delgado and Ramirez exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Reluctantly, Delgado nodded. "To the ridge, then we return." No arguments. The climb was brutal. The incline was steep, the ground slick with moss-covered rocks. Ethan, fueled by a desperate energy, pushed himself, ignoring the burning in his lungs. As they neared the crest, Ramirez, who was in the lead, suddenly stopped. "Inspector," he hissed, pointing, "look." Partially concealed by a curtain of hanging vines, an ancient ceiba tree stood sentinel, its massive trunk scarred and weathered. But it wasn't the tree itself that caught their attention. About chest height, carved into the bark, were a series of fresh-looking gashes. Not animal scratches, these were deliberate, almost geometric. Ethan's heart hammered. He scrambled forward, pushing past the officers. "What is it?" Delgado peered at the marks. "Animal, most likely? A large cat sharpening its claws." "No." Ethan breathed, his fingers tracing the indentations. The wood beneath felt raw, lighter than the surrounding bark. "These are too patterned, too regular." He moved around the massive trunk, tearing at the clinging vines. And then he saw it. On the leeward side, protected from the worst of the elements, was a clearer set of markings. A series of numbers, and then, unmistakably, a single, elegantly carved letter, quote, "C," Ethan whispered, a jolt, electric and terrifying, coursing through him. "C for Clara." He whirled on the officers, his eyes blazing. "What is this? Coordinates? Did you see this before?" Delgado's expression was unreadable, but Ramirez shifted uncomfortably. "Coordinates? Senor, this is nothing. Old markings. Children playing, perhaps. Or some local superstition. We may have seen something similar on previous searches." "Yes, I believe so." His voice lacked conviction. "These look fresh," Ethan insisted, his gaze locking onto Delgado's. "And the C? My wife's name is Clara." Delgado shrugged, a dismissive gesture that infuriated Ethan. "C could be Carlos, Cesar, Consuela, a common initial. We are certain, senor. These have been here a long time. The jungle plays tricks on the eyes, especially when one is distressed." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, a falsely congenial gesture. "Come, the storm approaches. We must go." Ethan knew they were lying, or at the very least, hiding something. A cold dread, sharper than any fear he'd felt before, began to uncoil within him. As the officers turned to begin their descent, Ethan, his back momentarily to them, quickly fumbled for his phone. With trembling hands, he snapped a series of photos of the carved numbers and the letter C. He had to get a signal. He had to find out what those numbers meant. Just as he pocketed his phone, Ramirez let out a sharp yelp. "Inspector! Jaguar spoor! Fresh!" "We need to leave. Now." He pointed to a patch of disturbed earth near the tree's roots, though Ethan, in his agitated state, hadn't noticed anything amiss. The urgency in Ramirez's voice was palpable, and even Delgado seemed genuinely alarmed. They practically frog-marched Ethan down the treacherous slope, their earlier lethargy replaced by a frantic haste. As they stumbled through the undergrowth, Ethan noticed a small, dark object on the ground, partially hidden by a fern, near where the spoor had supposedly been. It was a piece of obsidian, flaked and sharpened to a crude point, exactly the kind of primitive tool someone might use to carve into wood. While the officers were looking away, wrestling with a particularly thick patch of vines, Ethan snatched it up and shoved it into his pocket. The storm broke just as they reached the riverbank where their small launch was moored. Rain lashed down, turning the jungle into a blurry, green-gray chaos. The journey back to the small outpost of San Cristobal, where the police station was located, was a tense, miserable affair. Ethan sat huddled in the bow, the wind and rain stinging his face, his mind racing. The coordinates, the letter C, the officer's strange behavior, the sharpened obsidian, pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet assemble, but one that hinted at something far more sinister than a tragic accident. He clutched his phone in his pocket. The images had held his only lifeline, his only hope in the heart of the green hell. The serpent's coil had taken his family, but Ethan Vance was not going to let it keep them without a fight. The journey back to San Cristobal was a blur of lashing rain and the monotonous drone of the boat's outboard motor. Ethan felt a chill seep into his bones that had little to do with the downpour. The image of the carved coordinates and the letter C burned behind his eyelids. Inspector Delgado and Officer Ramirez maintained a stoic, almost sullen silence, their faces grim. Ethan tried to catch their eye, to gauge their reaction to his discovery, but they avoided his gaze, focusing intently on navigating the swollen, debris-strewn river. Once they docked at the rickety pier of San Cristobal, a dusty, one-street town that served as the regional police headquarters, Delgado clapped a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Senor Vance, we will file a report on today's findings, or lack thereof." He gave a pointed look. "These carvings you are so interested in, we will of course note them, but do not get your hopes up. The jungle is full of mysteries, most of them best left undisturbed." "I want those coordinates checked," Ethan said, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "They could mean something. My wife could have left them." Ramirez snorted. "A woman, lost in the jungle, carves precise coordinates? Senor, with all due respect, that is improbable." "We will discuss this at the station," Delgado interjected, his tone brooking no argument. "For now, you need rest, and perhaps to accept what is likely the truth." At the dilapidated police station, a low-slung building baking under the returning sun now that the storm had passed, Ethan was ushered into a small, stuffy waiting room. "We will be a few moments, senor." Internal procedures. Delgado's smile didn't reach his eyes. Alone, Ethan slumped onto a worn plastic chair. He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked, the battery perilously low, but the photos were there. He tried to get a signal, waving the phone around, but the bars remained stubbornly absent. San Cristobal was too remote. Frustration gnawed at him. He pulled out the small, folded map of the region he'd been carrying for weeks, its creases soft with wear. The Serpent's Coil was a vast, largely uncharted expanse. Without a reference point, the numbers were meaningless. He then remembered the piece of obsidian. He took it from his pocket, turning it over in his fingers. It was undeniably a tool, shaped by human hands. He was startled by a soft cough. A woman stood in the doorway, dressed in a crisp, if slightly faded, police uniform that bore captain's insignia. She was older than Delgado, perhaps in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her demeanor was a stark contrast to the slovenly indifference of the other officers. "Senor Vance?" she asked, her English clear and precise. "I am Captain Eva Rostova. I apologize for my colleagues. Their bedside manner can be lacking." She gestured to the chair opposite him. "May I?" Ethan nodded, a flicker of something not quite hope, but perhaps a lessening of despair stirring within him. Captain Rostova sat, her gaze direct. "I read the initial reports on your wife and daughter's disappearance. Julia and Lily, correct?" She used their names, a small detail that resonated with Ethan. "And I understand you were out with Inspector Delgado and Officer Ramirez again today." "Yes," Ethan said. "We found something. Carvings on a tree. Numbers and the letter C. Clara, that's my wife's name. I think she left them. But Delgado and Ramirez, they dismissed it. Said it was old." Rostova's eyebrows rose slightly. "Carvings? Did you get a photograph?" Ethan's heart leaped. "Yes, but my phone has no signal, and the battery is almost dead." "May I?" Rostova extended her hand. Ethan handed over the phone. She studied the images, her expression thoughtful. "These do appear relatively fresh. The wood is lighter, and this C." She looked up at Ethan. "Do you remember the numbers?" Ethan recited them from memory, his mind clinging to them like a mantra. Rostova jotted them down in a small notebook. "And this was near the Kutu Ridge, you said?" "Yes. They claimed to smell jaguar spoor and rushed us away." Ethan then produced the piece of obsidian. "I found this nearby. It looks like a carving tool." Rostova examined the obsidian, her lips pursed. "Interesting." She handed back his phone and the stone. "Senor Vance, the guide, Mateo Silva. What do you know of him?" "Only what the lodge told me, that he was experienced, knew the river." "Mateo Silva," Rostova said slowly, "is not officially registered with any reputable tour operators in this region. He's a freelancer, known to take on odd jobs, sometimes fishing, sometimes guiding tourists who prefer to go off the beaten path. He has a minor record petty theft, nothing violent." Ethan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "The lodge?" They recommended him. Lodges sometimes use unofficial guides to cut costs, or when their regulars are unavailable. It's a risk. Rostova leaned forward slightly. "The canoe, Senor Vance. You saw the damage?" "Yes. They said a flash flood or rocks." The official report, filed by Inspector Delgado, states damage consistent with impact during severe river conditions. However, she paused. I had a look at the photographs of the wreckage myself. Some of the breaks in the wood, they seemed unusually clean, almost as if made by a blade, not splintered by rocks. Ethan stared at her, his mind reeling. What are you saying? I am saying that there are aspects of this case that trouble me, Senor Vance. San Cristobal is a small town. The Serpent's Coil is a large, dangerous place. Things happen out there that are never reported. People disappear. And sometimes, her voice dropped, local authorities are less than diligent, or worse. The implication was chilling. You think Delgado and Ramirez? I think, Rostova said carefully, that Inspector Delgado has been in his position for a very long time. He has two connections. Officer Ramirez is his protege. I am relatively new here, transferred from the capital. I am still learning the local dynamics. She tapped the notebook with her pen. These coordinates. I have a contact in the regional survey office. I can try to get them plotted. It may take a little time, and I will look into Mateo Silva's known associates. A wave of gratitude, so strong it almost buckled him, washed over Ethan. For the first time in weeks, he felt he wasn't entirely alone in this. Thank you, Captain. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Senor Vance. We have found nothing concrete. But I promise you, I will look into this with more thoroughness than has perhaps been applied so far. She stood. Where are you staying? The El Soñador Lodge, just outside town. I will contact you there if I find anything. In the meantime, be cautious. You are a foreigner here, asking difficult questions. That can make certain people uncomfortable. Her eyes held a warning. And try to get some rest. You look like you are about to collapse. As Ethan left the station, the oppressive heat of San Cristobal seemed a little less suffocating. He still had no answers, but he had an ally. Captain Rostova. Her quiet competence and willingness to listen were a stark contrast to Delgado and Ramirez's dismissive arrogance. Back at his small, sparsely furnished room at El Soñador, Ethan plugged his phone into the charger, praying the aging generator wouldn't fail. He sat on the edge of the bed, the piece of obsidian in his hand. Clara was resourceful. If she had been able to, she would have left a sign. The coordinates had to be that sign. Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, there was a soft knock on his door. It was one of the lodge's young staff members, holding out a sealed envelope. From Captain Rostova, Senor. Ethan's hands trembled as he tore it open. Inside was a roughly sketched map. A red circle was drawn around a remote, almost inaccessible area deep within the Serpent's Coil, several miles from where they had found the canoe, and significantly further upstream than Kutu Ridge. A handwritten note was attached. Senor Vance. The coordinates point to a sector known locally as El Nido del Diablo, the Devil's Nest. It is a notoriously difficult area to access, characterized by dense jungle and treacherous ravines. Officially, there are no settlements there. Unofficially, it has a reputation. Rumors of unlisted airstrips, clandestine operations, poachers, smugglers, perhaps worse. The kind of place where people who don't want to be found can disappear. I have also learned that Mateo Silva was last seen in a cantina in Puerto Sombrio, a river village known as a rendezvous point for less reputable characters, talking about a lucrative, short-term guiding job for an American family. He seemed nervous. This was the day before your wife and daughter went missing. Delgado and Ramirez have filed their report. As expected, it mentions the old carvings as insignificant. Be very careful, Senor. This is deeper than it appears. E.R. Ethan stared at the map, his blood running cold. The Devil's Nest. Clandestine operations. Mateo Silva's nervousness. It all pointed to something far more sinister than an accidental drowning. His family hadn't just been lost to the jungle, they had been taken. And the local police, Delgado and Ramirez, were either incompetent or, more terrifyingly, complicit. He had to go back. He had to go to the Devil's Nest. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he could not trust the official channels to help him. The next morning, Ethan felt a grim resolve solidifying within him. Captain Rostova's information had been a bombshell, confirming his deepest fears. Clara and Lily weren't just lost, they were likely held captive. The thought of what they might be enduring sent splinters of ice through his veins, yet it also ignited a cold fury that eclipsed his exhaustion. He had to act, and he had to act now. He knew approaching Delgado and Ramirez directly with Rostova's findings would be foolish. They would either stonewall him, or worse, alert whoever was behind his family's disappearance. He needed a pretext to get back into the jungle, specifically towards the area Rostova had indicated as El Nido del Diablo. He found Delgado and Ramirez at their usual morning haunt, a small cantina near the police station, nursing cups of thick black coffee. Ethan approached their table, forcing a semblance of weary resignation into his demeanor. "Inspector, officer," he began, his voice carefully neutral. I've been thinking. Perhaps you are right. 9 weeks is a long time." He let out a sigh. "But there's one last thing. That ridge, Kutu Ridge, where we saw those carvings. I know you said they were old, but my wife, she had a small silver locket, a family heirloom. It's possible, if they sheltered there, it might have been dropped. It's a long shot, I know, but if I could just search that specific area one more time, thoroughly, for my own peace of mind." Delgado exchanged a glance with Ramirez. Ethan could almost see the cogs turning in their minds. A grieving husband, clutching at straws, wanting a final, futile search. It was plausible. It would also get him out of their hair, perhaps for good, if they could convince him of the hopelessness of his quest. "Senor Vance," Delgado said, his voice oozing false sympathy, "we understand your grief, but that area, it is dangerous." "I'll be careful," Ethan insisted, "and I'd be grateful if you could accompany me. Just to Kutu Ridge. I won't ask for more." After a show of reluctance, Delgado eventually conceded. "Very well, senor, one last time. But we leave at dawn, and we are back by midday. The conditions are worsening, and we cannot risk our men indefinitely." Ethan felt a small, bitter triumph. He had his way back in. Now, he just needed to figure out how to divert the search towards El Nido del Diablo without arousing their suspicion. Rostova's map was seared into his memory. The Devil's Nest was significantly northwest of Kutu Ridge, a treacherous trek even if he weren't being watched. The next dawn found them once again at the river's edge. The journey to Kutu Ridge was tense. Ethan feigned an interest in the flora and fauna, asking innocuous questions, trying to appear like a man on a desperate but ultimately hopeless mission. Delgado and Ramirez were curt, their earlier facade of patience gone. When they reached the base of Kutu Ridge, Ethan made a show of meticulously searching the area around the ceiba tree with the carved C. He poked through the undergrowth, examined crevices in the rocks, his heart pounding with the duplicity of his actions. "Anything, senor?" Ramirez asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "No, not yet," Ethan mumbled, moving further along the ridge, deliberately heading in a direction that, if continued, would eventually lead towards the area Rostova had marked. "This is pointless," Delgado grumbled after an hour. "There is nothing here." "Just a little further," Ethan said, pointing towards a dense thicket. "That looks like a small cave or overhang. They might have sheltered there." As he pushed through the tangled vegetation, further from the officers, he quickly consulted a compass he'd concealed in his palm. He was trying to orient himself, to find a landmark that might correspond with Rostova's sketch. The Serpent's Coil was a disorienting, monochromatic green hell. Suddenly, from behind him, Ramirez shouted, "Inspector, look, fresh tracks! Big cat, very fresh!" Ethan's blood ran cold. This time, the fear in Ramirez's voice sounded genuine. Delgado cursed. "Vance, back here, now." Ethan reluctantly turned. Delgado was pointing at a series of large paw prints in a patch of soft mud, prints that hadn't been there moments before. A low growl echoed from the dense jungle to their left. "Jaguar?" Delgado hissed, his hand instinctively going to the holstered pistol at his hip. "A big one. And close. We leave. Now. No arguments, Vance. Your locket can wait." The retreat was hasty, bordering on panicked. Even Ethan felt a primal fear prickle his skin. The jungle, which had been an oppressive but largely indifferent presence, suddenly felt alive, menacing, watching them with unseen eyes. He couldn't be sure if the jaguar was a genuine threat or a convenient excuse for the officers to curtail his search, but the growl had been chillingly real. Back at the boat, as they sped away from Kutu Ridge, Ethan felt a surge of frustration. His plan to subtly shift the search had been thwarted. He glanced back at the receding jungle, his mind racing. He had the coordinates. He had Rostova's map indicating the general location, but getting there, alone and unobserved, seemed impossible. That evening, back in his lodge room, Ethan stared at his phone, the battery now fully charged. He still had no signal. He spread Rostova's map and his own notes on the rickety table. El Nido del Diablo. He had to find a way. He thought of Captain Rostova. She was his only potential ally, but he couldn't risk implicating her further, not without more concrete proof. If Delgado and Ramirez suspected she was helping him, it could put her in danger. His eyes fell on the photos of the carvings again. The numbers. The elegant C. He zoomed in, studying every detail. The cuts were deep, deliberate. Clara wouldn't have done this unless it was vital. Unless it was their only hope. He remembered the piece of obsidian he'd found. He took it out, turning it in his fingers. A tool. A message. A new idea began to form. Desperate and dangerous. If he couldn't rely on Delgado and Ramirez, if he couldn't overtly involve Rostova, perhaps there was another way. Mateo Silva, the missing guide. Rostova had said he was last seen in Puerto Sombrio, a rendezvous point for less reputable characters. If Silva was involved, willingly or unwillingly, in his family's disappearance, then Puerto Sombrio might hold a key. It was a long shot, a wild gamble, but doing nothing was no longer an option. He spent the rest of the night studying the map, memorizing routes, calculating distances. Puerto Sombrio was a 2-day trek overland through hazardous territory or a risky boat journey up a treacherous tributary of the main river. Either way, it was a journey he would have to make alone. The next morning, he approached Delgado and Ramirez again. This time, his demeanor was one of utter defeat. "Inspector, officer," he said, his voice heavy. I give up. You were right. There's no hope." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm going to make arrangements to return home. But first, my wife. She loved the local crafts. There's a village upriver, Puerto Sombrio. I heard they have unique carvings." I thought, as a final gesture, to buy something to remember her by. Delgado raised an eyebrow. "Puerto Sombrio? That is not a place for tourists, Senor Vance. It is rough." "I know," Ethan said, "but I need to do this. For Clara, I can hire a local boatman. I won't trouble you further." Ramirez smirked. "Perhaps the jungle has finally broken him, Inspector." Delgado nodded slowly. "As you wish, Senor Vance. But be warned. We will not be responsible for what happens to you in Puerto Sombrio." It was exactly the reaction Ethan had hoped for. They saw him as a broken man, no longer a threat or a nuisance. They wouldn't be watching him. Later that day, Ethan packed a small, discreet rucksack, water purification tablets, a basic first aid kit, a compass, Rostova's map, a knife, the piece of obsidian, and his fully charged phone, which he now kept powered off to conserve the battery. He told the lodge manager he was going on a short, solo excursion upriver and would be back in a couple of days. Under the cloak of a moonless night, Ethan slipped away from the lodge. He didn't head for the main river dock. Instead, he followed a barely visible trail that led deeper into the jungle, in the direction of Puerto Sombrio. He was no jungle survival expert, but desperation was a powerful teacher. The coordinates, the letter C, the name El Nido del Diablo, these were his only guides now, carved not just on a tree, but into his very soul. The serpent's coil had his family, and Ethan Vance was coming for them, one perilous step at a time. The trek towards Puerto Sombrio was a brutal education in the unforgiving nature of the serpent's coil. Ethan, relying on his compass and Rostova's roughly sketched map, pushed himself relentlessly. The jungle was a disorienting maze of colossal trees, tangled undergrowth, and treacherous ravines. The air, thick and humid, vibrated with the cacophony of unseen creatures, the screech of monkeys, the buzz of insects, a constant torment, the occasional rustle in the bushes that sent his heart hammering. Twice, he stumbled upon venomous snakes, their scales iridescent against the leaf litter, and managed to freeze just in time. He moved mostly at night, navigating by the faint starlight that filtered through the dense canopy, resting during the hottest parts of the day in concealed spots. Food was scarce, a few edible berries he vaguely recognized from a survival guide he'd skimmed years ago, and the emergency rations he carried. Water, thankfully, was plentiful from small streams, though he meticulously purified every drop. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by nightmares, and the ever-present fear of discovery. On the third day, exhausted and running low on supplies, he finally stumbled upon a narrow, muddy river, a tributary that, according to Rostova's map, should lead to Puerto Sombrio. He fashioned a crude raft from fallen bamboo stalks and vines, a desperate, clumsy vessel, and began to paddle downstream, letting the sluggish current aid his progress. Puerto Sombrio, when he finally reached it, was less a village and more a collection of dilapidated shacks clinging precariously to the riverbank. A pall of wood smoke hung in the humid air. Rough-looking men, their faces weathered and suspicious, watched him from the shadows of crude verandas as he poled his makeshift raft towards a rickety landing. Children, clad in rags, stared with wide, unblinking eyes. There was an air of lawlessness, of secrets jealously guarded. This was not a place that welcomed outsiders. Ethan, feigning the weary demeanor of a lost traveler, managed to trade his small, sturdy knife for a bowl of fish stew and some information. He asked about Mateo Silva casually, as if inquiring about an old acquaintance. The name elicited guarded glances and mumbled denials. But one old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, eventually gestured towards a particularly ramshackle cantina at the far end of the village. "Silva sometimes drinks there, when he has money. Not seen him. Weeks." The cantina was dark and rank with the smell of stale beer and unwashed bodies. A few hardened men sat nursing warm cerveza, their conversation ceasing as Ethan entered. He ordered a drink, his eyes scanning the room. He felt a dozen hostile gazes on him. He knew this was a dangerous game. He was about to give up when a wiry man with shifty eyes sidled up to him. "You look for Silva?" he hissed, his breath smelling of cheap aguardiente. Ethan nodded, trying to appear nonchalant. "He owes me money." The man chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Silva owes many people money, but Silva is gone. Took a job. Big pay, they say, guiding some rich gringos. Then, vanished. Like your family, eh, Senor Vance?" The man's eyes glinted with a knowing, malevolent amusement. Ethan's blood ran cold. How did this man know his name? Know about his family? Before he could react, two larger men materialized from the shadows, blocking his exit. The shifty man's smile widened. "El Scorpion sends his regards. He heard you were asking questions. He does not like people asking questions." Ethan's hand instinctively went to the pocket where he kept the piece of obsidian, his only weapon. But it was too late. A searing pain exploded at the back of his head, and the world dissolved into blackness. He awoke to a throbbing headache and the nauseating sway of movement. He was lying on a rough canvas tarpaulin in the back of what felt like a truck, his hands bound tightly behind him, a foul-smelling sack pulled over his head. He could hear the rumble of an engine, the crunch of tires on an uneven track, and the gruff voices of men speaking rapid, slang-filled Spanish. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at him. He had walked right into a trap. His inquiries about Silva, his presence in Puerto Sombrio, it had all been reported. El Scorpion. The name sounded vaguely familiar, a whisper he'd heard in San Cristobal associated with the region's shadowy underworld. Hours seemed to pass. The truck lurched and bumped, throwing him against the hard sides of the vehicle. Thirst consumed him, and his head felt like it was splitting open. Finally, the truck shuddered to a halt. He heard doors opening, more voices. He was hauled roughly from the truck, his legs unsteady. The sack was ripped from his head. He blinked against the sudden, harsh light. He was in a crude clearing, surrounded by dense jungle. A collection of rough-hewn buildings stood nearby, their corrugated iron roofs glinting. Armed men, their faces hard and emotionless, regarded him with cold indifference. One man, clearly in charge, stepped forward. He was powerfully built, with a cruel mouth and eyes like chips of obsidian, the same eyes Ethan had seen in the man at the cantina. This had to be El Scorpion. "Senor Vance," El Scorpion said, his voice a low growl. "So persistent, so foolish. You should have stayed home, mourned your family like a sensible man. Where are they? Ethan choked out, his throat raw. Clara? Lily? What have you done with them? El Escorpión laughed, a humorless bark. Your wife and daughter? They are. Guests. Like you. Though your accommodations will be less comfortable. He gestured to two of his men. Take him to the pit. Let him reflect on the price of curiosity. Ethan struggled, but his captors were too strong. He was dragged towards one of the smaller, windowless buildings. A heavy wooden hatch was pulled open, revealing a dark, foul-smelling hole in the ground. A crude ladder led down into the blackness. He was forced down the ladder, into a damp, earthen cell. The hatch slammed shut above him, plunging him into near-total darkness, the only light filtering through tiny cracks in the ill-fitting wood. Despair, thick and suffocating, threatened to overwhelm him. He had failed. He had walked into their hands. Clara and Lily were somewhere in this god-forsaken compound, and he was powerless to help them. He sank to the damp floor, the stench of mold and something far worse filling his nostrils. He didn't know how long he lay there, lost in a miasma of fear and self-recrimination. Eventually his eyes adjusted to the gloom. He could make out the rough-hewn walls of his prison. And then, a soft groan from the far corner of the cell. He wasn't alone. "Hello?" Ethan called out, his voice raspy. A figure stirred, slowly sitting up. Even in the dim light, Ethan could see the man was gaunt, his clothes torn and filthy. "Who? Who is it?" the man whispered, his voice weak. "My name is Ethan Vance. My wife and daughter, they were taken." The man let out a ragged sigh. "Another one. They bring many here." He shifted, and a sliver of light from a crack in the hatch fell across his face. Ethan's breath hitched. The face was battered, almost unrecognizable, but there was something familiar about the eyes, the set of the jaw. "Mateo?" he whispered. "Mateo Silva?" The man flinched. "You know my name?" "I'm Ethan Vance," Ethan repeated, his mind reeling. "My wife, Clara, and my daughter, Lily, you were their guide." Recognition, followed by a wave of profound shame, flickered across Mateo Silva's face. "Señor Vance," he croaked. "Dios mío, I am so sorry." So sorry. Tears welled in his eyes. "It was supposed to be a simple detour, a quick robbery. Leave you unharmed, scared, but safe. I needed the money, but I took a wrong turn. Stumbled into their territory. They saw us. El Escorpión, he doesn't like witnesses." The truth, stark and brutal, hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. The guide, the man entrusted with his family's safety, had betrayed them, and in doing so, had delivered them all into the hands of monsters. The labyrinth had closed in, and Ethan was trapped at its heart, with the architect of his family's doom, his only cellmate. The air in the pit was thick with the stench of despair, damp earth, and human waste. Ethan stared at Mateo Silva, a maelstrom of emotions churning within him, anger, betrayal, but also a sliver of desperate hope. Silva was alive. He knew what had happened. "Tell me everything, Mateo," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. From the beginning, Mateo, broken and gaunt, began his wretched tale. He'd been in debt to local loan sharks. When El Escorpion's men had approached him with an offer guide, a wealthy American family, lead them to a prearranged ambush point where they would be robbed of their valuables, and he'd get a cut, he'd reluctantly agreed. "They promised no one would be hurt, senor. Just frighten them, take their cameras, their money." I was desperate, but it had gone wrong. Mateo, unfamiliar with the specific stretch of river El Escorpion's men had designated, had taken a wrong tributary. They had blundered into a secluded cove where a shipment of contraband drugs Ethan suspected was being unloaded. They were spotted. El Escorpion's men, far more ruthless than the petty thieves Mateo had expected, had captured them all. "They took your wife and daughter to the main compound," Mateo whispered, his voice hoarse. "I heard El Escorpión. He said they were valuable, especially the girl." A sob escaped him. "They beat me, left me for dead, but then they brought me here. They use this place to hold people who see too much, people they want to disappear. Have you seen them, Clara, Lily?" Ethan pressed, his heart aching. Mateo shook his head. "Not since that first day, but I hear things, whispers. The guards, they talk. They say El Escorpión has plans for them. He deals in more than just drugs, senor. He deals in people. Ethan felt a visceral sickness rise in his throat. What kind of plans? Before Mateo could answer, the heavy hatch above them creaked open, spilling harsh daylight into the pit. 2 armed guards peered down, their faces impassive. One of them barked an order in Spanish. "Silva, arriba! El Patron wants to see you." Fear, stark and primal, flashed in Mateo's eyes. He scrambled to his feet, trembling. "No, please." The guards lowered a rope ladder. One of them gestured menacingly with his rifle. "Move, basura!" As Mateo reluctantly began to climb, Ethan shouted, "What about my wife and daughter? Are they here? Are they safe?" The guard who had spoken spat into the pit. "Your gringas? They are being prepared for a long journey. El Escorpion has found a wealthy buyer, very discerning tastes." He chuckled, a cruel, grating sound, then slammed the hatch shut, plunging Ethan back into darkness and a new, more profound level of terror. A long journey, a wealthy buyer, discerning tastes. The words echoed in Ethan's mind, each one a hammer blow. This wasn't just about ransom. This was something far more insidious. Human trafficking. The serpent's coil wasn't just a jungle, it was a den of vipers, and El Escorpion was their king. Hours crawled by. Ethan paced the small cell, his mind a frantic whirl. He had to get out. He had to find Clara and Lily before it was too late. He examined the earthen walls, searching for any weakness, any possibility of escape. But the pit was solid, inescapable. Suddenly, he heard sounds from above. Voices, muffled at first, then clearer. He pressed his ear to the cracks in the hatch. He could hear El Escorpion's distinctive growl, and another voice, smoother, more cultured, speaking accented Spanish. "The merchandise is as described?" the smoother voice asked. "The woman, healthy, and the child? Purity is paramount for my client." "Immaculate, Señor Caito," El Escorpión replied. "My men have taken excellent care of them. The doctors have confirmed their health. No blemishes. They will fetch a premium price." Señor Caito. Doctors. Premium price. Ethan's blood ran cold. This was an auction, a sale of human lives. He felt a desperate rage build within him, a primal urge to tear his way out of the pit and rip these monsters apart with his bare hands. Then he heard footsteps approaching the hatch. It creaked open again. This time, it was El Escorpión himself who peered down, a smirk playing on his lips. "Señor Vance, it seems your stay in my humble abode is to be cut short. My associate, Señor Caito, has expressed an interest in expanding his purchase. He finds American men of your physique to be quite resilient. Good for hard labor in his mines overseas, perhaps." Ethan stared up at him, his mind reeling. "You won't get away with this." El Escorpión laughed. "Oh, I believe I already have, Señor. For years," he gestured. "Bring him up. Clean him. Make him presentable. We wouldn't want to disappoint our buyer." Ethan was hauled from the pit, blinking against the sudden light. He was shoved into one of the crude shacks, stripped of his filthy clothes, and doused with buckets of cold water. He was given a rough, clean shirt and trousers. Through it all, his mind raced, searching for an opportunity, a weakness. As he was being marched across the compound, towards a larger building where he assumed Señor Caito was waiting, he saw them. Through the open doorway of another shack, he caught a glimpse of Clara and Lily. They were huddled together on a cot, pale and terrified, but alive. Clara looked up, her eyes meeting Ethan's for a fleeting, desperate second. Recognition, shock, and a heartbreaking flicker of hope flashed across her face before a guard roughly pulled her back. Lily, small and frail, clung to her mother, her face streaked with tears. "Clara! Lily!" Ethan roared, lunging towards them, his bonds momentarily forgotten. The guards reacted instantly, slamming him to the ground, the butt of a rifle connecting with his ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. "Silence, Perro!" one of them snarled. But Ethan had seen them. They were alive. That single stolen glance, that spark of recognition in Clara's eyes, it was enough. It fanned the embers of his dying hope into a roaring flame. He would not let them be sold. He would not let them be taken. He was dragged into the main building, a sort of makeshift office. El Escorpión sat behind a large wooden desk, Señor Caito beside him, sipping from a glass of amber liquid. Caito was a slight, impeccably dressed man of Asian descent. his eyes cold and reptilian. He appraised Ethan with a chilling detachment, like a butcher examining a side of beef. "Ah, the husband," Kaito said, his voice soft, almost a purr. "Yes, he has spirit. My client appreciates spirit. It makes the breaking in process more rewarding." "He is strong," Scorpion said. "He survived 3 days alone in the jungle, before my men found him sniffing around Puerto Sombrio. Resourceful." "Indeed," Kaito mused. "A package deal, then? The mother, the daughter, and the father? It has a certain symmetry." "The price will reflect the expanded consignment, of course," Scorpion said, his eyes glinting with greed. Ethan's mind was a maelstrom. He had to do something. He scanned the room, his eyes darting from the guards at the door to the weapons on Scorpion's desk. An idea, desperate and suicidal, began to form. He remembered the piece of obsidian he'd found near Kudu Ridge, the tool Clara had likely used to carve her message. The guards had taken everything from his pockets when they'd captured him in Puerto Sombrio. Or had they? He'd been wearing different trousers then, the ones he trekked in. When they'd cleaned him, they'd given him fresh, rough clothes. Had they bothered to check the pockets of his old, filthy trousers before presumably discarding them? It was a minuscule chance. "Before we conclude our business," Ethan said, his voice surprisingly steady, "may I ask one question?" Scorpion raised an eyebrow, amused. "Indulge him, Senor Kaito. His last request, perhaps." "My wife?" Ethan said, his gaze fixed on Scorpion. "The carvings on the tree at Kutu Ridge. The coordinates. The letter K. That was her, wasn't it? How did she manage it?" A flicker of surprise, then annoyance, crossed Scorpion's face. "So, you are not as foolish as you look." "Yes, the woman was clever. She scratched them during transport stops, when she asked to relieve herself. A little each time. With a piece of sharp rock she found. We discovered it too late. It seems her message found its mark, even if it only led you into my grasp." He leaned back, a smug smile on his face. "But it changes nothing. She is still mine to sell. They are all mine to sell." It was the confirmation Ethan needed. Clara, his brave, resourceful Clara, had fought back in the only way she could. She had left him a trail, and he, in his despair, had nearly missed its significance. He thought of the clothes he'd been wearing, now likely piled in a corner of the shack where he'd been doused. If that piece of obsidian was still there, his chance came sooner than he expected. As Scorpion and Kaito haggled over the final price, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, a single gunshot. One of Scorpion's men burst into the room, his face pale. "Patron! Police! Viridian regulars! And someone else! They are attacking the north perimeter!" "Police? Here? How? Could it be Rostova?" Ethan's heart leaped. Scorpion cursed, jumping to his feet. "Kaito, take your merchandise and go! Use the emergency tunnel! My men will cover your escape!" He barked orders, and the room dissolved into chaos. Guards rushed out. Kaito, his composure momentarily shattered, grabbed a briefcase and gestured frantically to his own bodyguards. In the confusion, as Scorpion's attention was diverted, Ethan saw his opening. He lunged, not for a weapon, but for the door leading back towards the shacks. He had to get to his old clothes. He had to find that piece of obsidian. It was more than just a tool now. It was a symbol of Clara's defiance, and potentially his only weapon in the heart of the serpent's den. The compound was a scene of pandemonium. Gunfire crackled from the north, closer now. Scorpion's men were scrambling, some rushing towards the sounds of fighting, others seemingly trying to secure key points within the cluster of buildings. Ethan, adrenaline surging through his veins, sprinted towards the crude hut where he'd been forcibly bathed. The guards who had been posted there were gone, presumably joining the fray. He burst into the small, damp space. His old, filthy clothes lay in a heap in the corner. With frantic hands he searched the pockets of the torn trousers. His fingers closed around a small, sharp-edged object. The piece of obsidian, Clara's tool, his weapon. He clutched it tightly, its rough edges biting into his palm. He had no illusions. A sliver of sharpened rock against automatic weapons was suicide. But he wasn't planning a frontal assault. He needed leverage. He needed Clara and Lily. He peeked out of the hut. Scorpion was bellowing orders near the main office, trying to rally his disorganized men. Senor Kaito and his two bodyguards were being hustled by a pair of El Escorpion's lieutenants towards a dilapidated-looking shed at the edge of the compound. The emergency tunnel, Ethan guessed. And then he saw them. Clara and Lily, their wrists bound, were being dragged by two other guards in the same direction. Time was running out. The firefight at the perimeter, whoever was involved, wouldn't last forever. Once Kaito and his merchandise were in that tunnel, they'd be gone. Ethan took a deep breath. He had one chance. Staying low, using the chaotic movement of El Escorpion's men as cover, he darted from the hut, circling around the main buildings, trying to intercept the group, heading for the tunnel shed. He moved with a desperate agility he didn't know he possessed, his bare feet surprisingly silent on the packed earth. He reached the shed just as Kaito's group was about to enter. Clara and Lily were a few paces behind, their guards prodding them forward. Ethan launched himself from the shadows, not at the heavily armed bodyguards, but at the smaller of the two men guarding his wife and daughter. He slammed into the man's side, the sharpened obsidian held tight in his fist, aiming for the exposed side of the guard's neck. The man let out a gurgling cry, stumbling, his hands flying to the wound. The second guard, momentarily stunned, raised his rifle. Ethan didn't hesitate. He kicked out, a desperate, instinctive movement, connecting with the man's kneecap. The guard howled, his rifle clattering to the ground as he crumpled. "Clara! Lily! Run!" Ethan yelled, grabbing the fallen rifle. It felt heavy, alien in his hands, but he knew the basic mechanics from movies and news reports. Kaito's bodyguards whirled, weapons raised. But before they could fire, Clara acted. With a fierce cry, she bit down hard on the wrist of the lieutenant holding her arm. The man shrieked in pain, his grip loosening. Lily, small but surprisingly quick, ducked under the arm of her own captor and scrambled towards Ethan. "Dad!" she cried, her voice a beacon in the chaos. Ethan fired a wild burst from the rifle towards Kaito's bodyguards, not aiming to hit, but to create a diversion. The bullets thudded into the wooden wall of the shed. The bodyguards, momentarily taking cover, returned fire. Splinters flew around Ethan. He grabbed Lily, pushing her behind him. "Clara, this way!" Clara, having wrenched herself free, was already moving. She snatched up the rifle dropped by the second guard Ethan had incapacitated. Her face was a mask of fierce determination. "I know how these work," she hissed, her voice tight with adrenaline. "Hunting trips with my father." The unexpected resistance from their captives, coupled with the ongoing firefight at the perimeter, seemed to throw Kaito's escorts into disarray. One of Kaito's bodyguards, seeing his principal's escape threatened, charged towards Ethan, firing his pistol. Ethan shoved Lily further behind a stack of oil drums, raising the rifle. He squeezed the trigger. The kickback slammed into his shoulder, but the bodyguard staggered, clutching his leg, and went down. "The tunnel!" Kaito shrieked, his voice high-pitched with panic. He and his remaining bodyguard, along with El Escorpion's lieutenants, scrambled into the shed. "We can't let them escape," Ethan yelled, but more of El Escorpion's men were converging on their position, drawn by the gunfire. They were trapped between the shed and the approaching reinforcements. Suddenly, from the jungle edge behind them, a new wave of gunfire erupted, disciplined, accurate shots that sent El Escorpion's men diving for cover. Figures in camouflage emerged from the trees, moving with professional precision. "Viridian Federal Police! Drop your weapons!" A commanding female voice boomed through a megaphone. "Captain Rostova!" Ethan felt a surge of incredulous relief. She had come. How? One of Rostova's officers, a tough-looking woman with a scar on her cheek, reached Ethan's position. "Senor Vance, Captain Rostova sent us. We got your distress call an hour ago. Pinpointed your location just as the assault began." "My phone," Ethan stammered, confused. "I never made a call. The battery was dead when I was captured in Puerto Sombrio." The officer frowned. "No, senor. The call came from your phone. A garbled connection. But we got a GPS lock. It was active inside this compound." Ethan stared at her, uncomprehending. Then his eyes fell on Clara. She was still clutching the rifle, but her other hand was fumbling in the pocket of her torn dress. She pulled out his mobile phone. The screen was cracked, but it was undeniably his. "When they moved us to the main compound," Clara said, her voice breathless, "I saw one of the younger guards looking at videos on a phone. He left it on a table when he was called away." I recognized it as similar to yours. I swapped them. Later, when they weren't watching, I managed to hide yours. I tried to call the emergency number. I didn't know if it went through." Ethan stared at his wife, his heart swelling with a mixture of awe and overwhelming love. Clara, always resourceful, always thinking. Even in the depths of their captivity, she had found a way. The firefight was intense but brief. Rostova's well-trained federal officers, clearly outnumbering and outmaneuvering El Escorpion's disorganized thugs, quickly gained the upper hand. Several of El Escorpion's men threw down their weapons, hands raised in surrender. Others tried to flee into the jungle, only to be cut off. "The tunnel!" Ethan yelled, pointing to the shed. "Kaito and some of El Escorpion's men went in there." Rostova herself, pistol in hand, materialized beside them. "My team is on it, Senor Vance. The tunnel has another exit, but we have it covered." Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, took in Ethan, Clara, and Lily. "Are you all right?" Before Ethan could answer, a roar of fury erupted from the main office building. El Escorpion, his face contorted with rage, burst out, a submachine gun blazing in his hands. He was firing indiscriminately, a cornered animal making his last stand. "Get down!" Rostova yelled, pushing Ethan and his family towards the cover of the oil drums. Bullets whined past them. Rostova and her officers returned fire. El Escorpion, hit multiple times, staggered, but kept firing, his eyes fixed on Ethan with pure hatred. "You, gringo! You ruined everything!" he snarled, blood frothing at his lips. He raised his weapon for one last burst. Ethan reacted instinctively. He pushed Clara and Lily further down, shielding them with his own body, bracing for the impact. But the shots never came. Instead, a single, sharp crack echoed across the compound. El Escorpion's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the ground, his submachine gun falling silent. Standing in the doorway of the pit building, a smoking pistol in his hand, was Mateo Silva. His face was grim, his eyes haunted. He had, in the chaos, apparently found a way out and armed himself. Silence, heavy and profound, descended upon the compound, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the curt commands of Rostova's officers securing the area. The serpent's den had been breached. The king of this venomous pit was dead. Ethan pulled Clara and Lily close, their bodies trembling against his. It was over. Or perhaps it was just the beginning of their long journey back from the brink. The brief, chaotic firefight at El Escorpion's main compound had scattered his forces, but Ethan knew the real threat remained. Senor Kaito, the reptilian buyer, had vanished into the tunnel with his prize Clara and Lily. Captain Rostova's voice echoed through the smoky air. "Vance, they're heading for the old processing site. It's their fallback transaction point, about 2 clicks east, by the Blackwood Creek. We have teams moving to intercept, but they have a head start, 2 kilometers, through dense jungle." Ethan's heart hammered. Rostova's main force might be too late. He glanced at Clara. She was battle, worn, but her eyes blazed with a fierce light. Lily clung to her, terrified but resilient. "I'm going after them," Ethan declared, grabbing the rifle he'd taken. "Clara, stay with Lily. Rostova's people will protect you." "No, Ethan," Clara cried, her hand gripping his arm. "It's too dangerous." "I have to," he said, his voice raw. "I can move faster alone. If Kaito reaches that site and completes his deal—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He kissed her hard, then squeezed Lily's shoulder. "I'll be back, I promise." Before anyone could stop him, Ethan plunged into the undergrowth, Rostova's shouts fading behind him. He was no jungle tracker, but the path Kaito's group would take to a known fallback point wouldn't be entirely virgin. He looked for broken twigs, disturbed earth, the faintest signs of passage, pushing his body to its limits, adrenaline overriding his exhaustion. The image of Kaito's cold eyes, the chilling talk of merchandise, fueled his desperate pace. After what felt like an eternity of crashing through tangled vines and stumbling over unseen roots, he heard the murmur of Blackwood Creek. And then, voices. He dropped to a crouch, peering through the dense foliage. Ahead lay a clearing, dominated by a squat, concrete building with barred windows and a corrugated metal roof, the old processing site. A rusty chain-link fence, topped with barbed wire, surrounded it. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. A sleek, black SUV, out of place in this wilderness, was parked near a loading dock. And there, being hustled towards the building by Kaito and his remaining bodyguard, were Clara and Lily. Ethan's stomach lurched. They were already here. He was almost too late. He saw Kaito speaking into a satellite phone, his expression impatient. The transaction was clearly imminent. Ethan knew he couldn't wait for Rostova. He had to act now. He had the rifle, maybe half a clip of ammunition left, and the piece of obsidian still clutched in his hand. He circled the compound, staying deep in the shadows of the jungle, looking for a weak point. The back of the property, where the jungle pressed closest to the fence, seemed less heavily guarded. One lone sentry paced a short beat. Ethan waited, his breath held, until the guard turned his back. Then he sprinted, a silent shadow, across the intervening 20 yards. The fence was old, sections of it rusted. He found a spot where the links were broken near the ground, wriggling under it, tearing his shirt but emerging inside the perimeter undetected. He pressed himself against the cold concrete wall of the building, inching his way towards a grimy window. He could hear voices from within Kaito's smooth tones and another, rougher voice he didn't recognize, presumably the site's custodian. "The transfer is confirmed, Senor Kaito," the rough voice said. "The funds are secure. The merchandise is ready for transport. Your jet is waiting at the usual strip." "Excellent," Kaito replied. "My client is eager, the girl especially. Such purity is rare. And the mother, still young enough to provide several viable harvests." Harvests. The word, clinical and brutal, sent a fresh wave of rage and nausea through Ethan. He gripped the rifle, his knuckles white. No more waiting. He moved to a heavy steel door at the rear of the building, near the loading dock. It was slightly ajar. Taking a deep, steadying breath, he kicked it open and stormed in, rifle leveled. "Nobody move," he roared. The room was a makeshift office. Kaito and the rough-voiced man whirled, stunned. Two guards, who had been lounging near a doorway leading further into the building, scrambled for their weapons. Clara and Lily were there, tied to chairs in the center of the room, their eyes wide with terror, then dawning, incredulous hope. "Ethan!" Clara gasped. "Drop your weapons!" Ethan shouted, his rifle swinging between Kaito and the guards. "Let them go, or I swear I'll kill every last one of you." Kaito, recovering his composure, sneered. "You? Alone? Against all of us? Foolish gringo." He nodded curtly to his bodyguard, who had been momentarily out of sight and now stepped from a side room, pistol raised. The rough-voiced man also drew a weapon. The two guards by the inner door advanced. Ethan was outmanned, outgunned. But he had the advantage of surprise and a fury born of desperation. He fired a short burst, not at Kaito, but at the legs of the advancing guards. One screamed and went down. The other hesitated. In that instant, Clara, despite her bound hands, kicked out with all her might, toppling her chair and sending herself crashing into the legs of Kaito's bodyguard as he aimed at Ethan. The bodyguard stumbled, his shot going wide. Ethan lunged, not with the rifle, but with the obsidian shard. He slammed into the rough-voiced man, driving the sharpened stone into the man's exposed throat. The man gurgled, blood erupting, and collapsed. Kaito, his face a mask of fury, shrieked, "Kill him! Kill them all!" The remaining compound guard charged, but Ethan, dropping the now empty rifle, met him head-on. They crashed to the floor, wrestling for the guard's pistol. Ethan felt a searing pain as the guard's fist connected with his jaw. Black spots danced in his vision. Suddenly, the outer door burst open again. Figures in tactical gear poured in Captain Rostova and her federal team, weapons blazing. They must have heard the gunfire. "Police! Freeze!" Rostova's voice cut through the din. Chaos erupted. Kaito's bodyguard, recovering, opened fire on the police. The compound guard Ethan was grappling with tried to bring his pistol to bear. Ethan, with a final desperate surge of strength, twisted the guard's wrist, feeling bone grind. The guard howled. Ethan slammed the man's head against the concrete floor. Across the room, Rostova's team was systematically neutralizing Kaito's resistance. Kaito himself, seeing his deal unraveling, made a break for a back exit, but two officers intercepted him, wrestling him to the ground. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his body aching, and rushed to Clara and Lily. He fumbled with the ropes binding their wrists, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline and emotion. "Dad? You came," Lily sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck as soon as she was free. "I promised," Ethan choked out, holding her tight, then pulling Clara into their embrace. Her shoulders were shaking, but her eyes, when they met his, were filled with an unshakable strength. "Your timing was dramatic, Signor Vance," Captain Rostova said, approaching them, her pistol still warily covering the subdued traffickers. A small, appreciative smile touched her lips. "But effective. We were 5 minutes out when we heard the shots." "He used this, Captain," one of her officers said, holding up the bloody piece of obsidian. "Took one of them down clean." Rostova looked at the primitive tool, then at Ethan, a newfound respect in her eyes. "The jungle provides, it seems, in more ways than one." She surveyed the scene, the captured traffickers, the bodies of the fallen. "This network, Senor Kaito's network, is far-reaching. Your family, they were to be flown out tonight, to a private clinic in a country with lax regulations." Her voice was grim. "You saved them from a fate worse than death, Senor Vance. You all saved each other." Ethan looked at Clara, at Lily, battered, terrified, but alive, together. The race against time had been won, not by minutes, but by seconds, by a father's love and a family's unbreakable will to survive the devil's bargain. The sterile white walls of the field hospital set up by the Viridian military in San Cristobal were a jarring contrast to the oppressive green that had been their prison. Ethan sat on a hard plastic chair, positioned midway between two cots. On one, Lily slept, her small face finally relaxed. A teddy bear, a gift from one of Rostova's female officers, clutched in her arms. On the other, Clara lay resting, her eyes closed, though Ethan knew she wasn't truly asleep. The doctors had treated their immediate physical ailments: dehydration, malnutrition, countless insect bites, and Clara's raw, chemical-burned hands from being forced to work in El Escorpion's makeshift drug lab. The psychological scars, however, would run far deeper and take much longer to heal. A soft knock on the makeshift door, a repurposed tarpaulin, announced Captain Rostova. She looked weary but wore an air of grim satisfaction. "Senor Vance," she said quietly, nodding towards Clara and Lily. "How are they?" "Physically they'll recover," Ethan replied, his voice hoarse. "The rest will take time." He ran a hand through his matted hair. He hadn't slept in what felt like days, existing on adrenaline and sheer willpower. "What you did, Captain, I don't have the words." Rostova waved a dismissive hand, pulling up another plastic chair. "I was doing my job, Senor. The one I swore to do. Sometimes, even in a place like Viridia, the good guys get a win." She paused. "I thought you'd want an update." Ethan nodded, his gaze drifting to Lily. Even in sleep, her brow occasionally furrowed. "El Escorpion's entire operation here is dismantled," Rostova began. "The main compound, the processing site, several hidden airstrips. We've arrested over 30 of his men. Senor Kaito is singing like a canary, hoping for a reduced sentence. His information is leading us to a global network specializing in human trafficking and organ harvesting. Your family's ordeal, as horrific as it was, will help save countless others." "And the corrupt officers?" Ethan asked, thinking of Delgado and Ramirez. "The ones in San Cristobal?" Rostova's lips thinned. "Inspector Delgado and Officer Ramirez are in custody. We found evidence linking them directly to El Escorpion payments, communications. They were his eyes and ears in town, ensuring no official interference. They will face the full extent of Viridian justice, which, I assure you, can be quite severe for traitors in uniform." "What about Mateo Silva?" Ethan asked, a complex mix of anger and pity still associated with the guide's name. "He helped at the end. He shot El Escorpion." "Silva's situation is complicated," Rostova sighed. "He confessed to his initial involvement, the planned robbery. He claims he never intended for anyone to be seriously harmed and was horrified when El Escorpion took your family. His actions in the compound, aiding you and ultimately killing El Escorpion, will be taken into account. He'll face charges for his initial crimes, but his cooperation will likely earn him leniency. He seems genuinely remorseful." She looked at Ethan. "He asked me to convey his deepest apologies to you and your wife. He knows it means little, but he wanted you to hear it." Ethan was silent for a moment, processing. Justice, in its messy, imperfect way, was being served. Clara's eyes opened. She had been listening. "Captain," she said, her voice weak but clear. "Thank you, Senora Vance," Rostova said gently. "The courage you and your daughter showed. It was extraordinary. The way you carved those coordinates, swapped the phones. You gave us the chance we needed." Clara managed a faint smile. "I just wanted my daughter safe. I remembered Ethan showing me how his phone's GPS worked, even without a cell signal, for mapping hikes. When I saw that guard's phone, I knew it was a long shot. But it was the only shot I had." She looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with an emotion so profound it made his chest ache. "You found my message. I knew you would. I never stopped believing you'd come for us." "Never," Ethan whispered, taking her hand, its skin rough and tender. "The coordinates," Clara continued, her voice gaining a little strength. "I saw them on a GPS device one of the guards carried during a transport. They moved us between facilities every few days to avoid detection. I memorized them, scratched a little bit onto a tree with that rock each time we stopped, and I could slip away for a moment, praying anyone would find it." The C was for Clara, but also for coordinates, courage, come. Tears welled in her eyes. They were going to sell Lily and me for parts. Her voice broke. Ethan squeezed her hand, his own tears blurring his vision. "It's over now, my love. It's all over." A small voice piped up from the other cot. "Mommy, did you really write on a tree to save us?" Lily was awake, her eyes wide, taking in the scene. Clara smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that seemed to chase the shadows from the room. "I tried, sweetie, but your daddy is the one who found it and understood. He's our hero." "We all saved each other," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, moving to sit on the edge of Lily's cot, still holding Clara's hand, bridging the space between his two brave girls. "That's what families do. We never give up on each other." For the first time since their rescue, Lily's smile mirrored her mother's, a tentative dawn breaking across her small face. Rostova stood, a discreet presence. "I'll leave you. The embassy is arranging your transport home as soon as the doctors clear you for travel." She paused at the tarpaulin door. "The Serpent's Coil is a dark place, Senor Vance. But even in the deepest darkness, courage and love can shine a light. You and your family are proof of that." As the captain departed, Ethan looked from his wife to his daughter. They were battered, scarred, but unbroken. The jungle's emerald tendrils had tried to suffocate them, to swallow them whole, but they had fought their way back into the sun. The road ahead would be long. There would be nightmares, therapy, moments when the shadows of the Serpent's Coil would try to reclaim them, but they would face it together. Outside the field hospital, the edge of the vast, impenetrable jungle was visible, a green line against the horizon. It still held its mysteries, its terrors. But for Ethan, Clara, and Lily, its power to intimidate was diminished. They had stared into its heart, faced its worst monsters, and emerged, forever changed, but not defeated. The coordinates carved into that ancient ceiba tree had been more than just a location. They had been a testament to a mother's fierce love, a father's relentless hope, and a child's innocent resilience, a cipher that had led them through hell and back to each other, towards a new, shared sunrise.